I'm Jessie Craftsman, 39, and I built a nationwide health nonprofit from the ground up. For years, I supported my family financially, quietly covering bills, debts, and disasters. But when I donated my entire inheritance to charity, they disowned me on the spot. That decision? It changed everything. Ever been cut off or betrayed by the very people you showed up for? Drop your story in the comments, you're not the only one. Before I dive in, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to choose yourself over keeping the peace, hit like and subscribe. What happened next, you won't believe. My name is Jessie Craftsman, and the last time I was in a room with my whole family, I was 27 and holding a check for $1.2 million. I remember the way they looked at me, not with pride, but calculation. That money, in their eyes, wasn't mine. It was ours. Or more specifically, theirs. To understand why giving that inheritance away caused an earthquake in my family, you'd have to go back a bit. I grew up in a small coastal town in Massachusetts, buttoned-up houses, Sunday church, everyone knowing your business before you did. My parents, Michael and Diane Craftsman, were the kind of people who smiled wide for community photos and measured worth in titles, square footage, and how close your lawn came to country club perfection. We weren't wealthy in the way the magazines define it, but we were comfortable. Respectable. Dad ran a mid-size insurance firm. Mom was the PTA queen turned real estate agent. From the outside, we looked like a model family. But there was a quiet script beneath everything. Success wasn't about happiness or integrity, it was about optics. I was the oldest of three. My sister Caroline came 2 years after me, and my brother Nathan 3 years after her. I was the dutiful one. Quiet. Straight-A student. Played piano, captained the debate team, never missed curfew. My role was clear, make the family look good. By the time I hit high school, my parents had a system. Caroline was the performer, ballet recitals, pageants, fundraisers. Nathan, the wild card, got a pass on almost everything as long as he didn't tank the image. I was the one who held things together. Made the charts for Dad's retirement plan. Edited Mom's listing descriptions. Drove Caroline to her practices when they were too busy. There's this phrase my mom loved to use at dinner parties. Jessie's the reliable one. We never have to worry about her. It was meant as praise, but it landed like a warning. Don't become someone they have to worry about. Don't take up space. What I gave them over the years wasn't loud or dramatic. It was time. Labor. Stability. I managed the estate sale when my grandmother died. Built Nathan's first resume when he was too hungover to care. Loaned Caroline money for her marketing internship in LA. They didn't say thank you. They just treated it like an investment. Jessie helps. That's what she does. The imbalance started to grate in my 20s. Not all at once, just small moments. Nathan showing up to Christmas drunk and still being welcomed like royalty. Caroline forgetting my birthday 3 years in a row and then posting throwback selfies with captions like, grateful for family. Mom asking if I'd dress a little more feminine for Easter lunch, just so the neighbors didn't think I was single on purpose. Still, I stayed connected. I flew home for holidays, sent cards, helped Dad navigate his new iPhone, reminded Mom how to log into Zillow. I told myself it was what good daughters do. Then Grandpa died. He was the outlier in the family. A World War II vet turned local school principal, he valued service and humility over status. We were close in a quiet way. He'd write me letters in college, little notes about moral courage, the importance of doing the right thing even when no one claps for it. When he passed, the family barely waited 48 hours before asking about the will. I wasn't in the room for that conversation, but I can imagine it. Dad calculating the value of the house. Mom wondering how much she could get for the antique desk. Caroline probably assumed she'd get the lake cabin. No one expected Grandpa to have much, but they were ready to divide it anyway. The shock came later. Grandpa had left nearly everything to me. It was a trust he'd set up years ago, money from his pension, investments I didn't even know he had. A little over $1 million earmarked for Jessie to support her pursuit of a meaningful life. The clause was specific. It skipped over the rest of the family entirely. No breakdowns, no percentages. Just my name. I found out during a scheduled call with the family attorney. My parents hadn't even mentioned there was a reading. We figured it wasn't a big deal, Mom said when I called afterward. Just a formality. Everything's probably split evenly. When I told them what the lawyer said, the silence was immediate. Then Dad asked if I was sure I'd heard correctly. Then Caroline asked how much it was. Then Mom said, well, of course you'll want to do the right thing. The right thing. Meaning, split it. Hand it over. Pretend Grandpa hadn't made a choice they found inconvenient. The thing is, I hadn't made any decisions yet. But something about the way they assumed, expected, I'd share it set off something in me I couldn't ignore. I didn't announce anything right away. I needed time to think. I spent a weekend at a small cabin outside Boston, just me and a notebook and a list of everything I'd watched my family prioritize over the years. Appearances. Status. Control. It was never about fairness or gratitude. It was about what looked right. And to them, me keeping the money wouldn't look right. But using it for something real? Something Grandpa would have believed in? That started to feel like the only option that was right. When I told them what I was doing, they didn't believe me. I'm donating the entire trust to an education fund, I said over dinner. Specifically for first-generation college students from underfunded schools. Caroline laughed. You're not serious. Dad put his fork down slowly. That money was for the family. No, I said. It was for me. Grandpa made that clear. My mother's voice turned cold. He was old. He probably wasn't thinking clearly. He knew exactly what he was doing. That was the last calm moment before things unraveled. They called me selfish. Accused me of grandstanding. Caroline shouted, actually shouted, that money was for us, you fool. I remember the sound of my suitcase wheels scraping the floor as I rolled it toward the door. The sharp clink of a spoon hitting a plate. Nobody stopped me. Nobody followed me out. It would be 12 years before I saw them again. And when I did, it wasn't at a wedding or a funeral or some planned reunion. It was at a job fair in Chicago. My company's hiring event. One I'd helped organize. I was the final interview of the day. They walked in, dressed for opportunity. Resumes in hand. Not knowing the CEO they were meeting was the daughter they'd disowned. When they saw me behind the desk, they froze. And I smiled. Not cruelly. Just enough to let them know I hadn't forgotten. In the months after I walked out of that house, I kept waiting for someone to reach out. A call. An apology. Even just a message asking if I was serious. But nothing came. They moved on like I'd never existed. Or like I had never mattered in the first place. Which, looking back, wasn't a new feeling. Being the eldest meant I was the test run. The one expected to set the tone. Be dependable. Be smart. Be the one who didn't need as much. That was the line my parents used whenever something wasn't fair. You're stronger, Jessie. You always figure it out. At 7, I wore that like a badge of honor. By 16, it felt more like a sentence. I got my first job at a diner when I was 15. Weekend shifts mostly, hostessing at first, then waiting tables when I turned 16. I saved every dollar. Not because I had a plan, but because I knew no one else was going to do it for me. My parents liked to say they were teaching me the value of hard work, but Caroline never had a job in high school. Nathan tried landscaping one summer, quit after 2 weeks, and Dad just shrugged. Not everyone's cut out for manual labor. When college applications rolled around, I filled out my FAFSA alone at the kitchen table. Asked my guidance counselor to look over my essays because I knew my parents wouldn't. They were busy, Mom with open houses, Dad with the golf tournament his firm sponsored every spring. Caroline needed help shopping for prom. Nathan had just crashed the car. Again. I got into 4 state schools and 1 private university on the East Coast. The private school offered me a scholarship, full tuition, partial housing. The gap wasn't small, but I figured I could close it with work study and loans. When I told my parents I wanted to go, they frowned like I'd just announced I was moving to the moon. Why would you choose the expensive option? Dad asked. You'll be drowning in debt for years. Because it's a better program, I said. And they're covering most of it. Mom sighed. If we help with anything, it'll have to be minimal. You know, we're already setting money aside for Caroline. She's going to need more support when it's her turn. So I went. Took 2 part-time jobs, lived in the cheaper dorms, skipped meal plans, learned to stretch $5 at a time. I called home, but the conversations got shorter. Mom wanted updates on Caroline. Dad wanted to know if I'd considered transferring to a state school closer to home. Eventually, I stopped expecting anything else. By my second year, Caroline started asking for favors. Money for a bus ticket to visit her boyfriend. Help editing her application essay for NYU. I helped. I always did. At the time, it didn't feel like a sacrifice. It felt like duty. Like something older sisters just did. After college, I landed an entry-level position at a nonprofit in Boston focused on educational equity. The salary was modest, but I loved the work. Every time I helped a student navigate college admissions or figure out their loan paperwork, I thought about how I'd had to figure it all out alone. I knew what it felt like to have the door closed in your face. Meanwhile, Caroline was bouncing between internships and temporary jobs. She'd call late at night, dramatic and teary, needing help with rent or asking if I knew anyone hiring. I'd send her what I could. Covered 2 months of her car insurance when she forgot to pay it. Paid the deposit on her new apartment when she wanted to move across the city to be closer to a guy she'd just started dating. It wasn't that I didn't want to help her. It was just never acknowledged. No thank you. No offer to pay me back. Just the assumption that I would, and should, help. Because I was doing fine and she was still figuring things out. Nathan followed a similar pattern. He flunked out of college his first year and spent the next 2 years working part-time jobs and crashing on friends' couches. My parents framed it as a rough patch. When I asked if they were worried, Mom just said, "He'll land on his feet. Boys just take longer to mature." By then, I had moved up in my nonprofit, managing a team and overseeing a program that placed first-generation students in mentorship pipelines. I was still earning under industry average, but I'd learned to budget down to the cent. I lived in a tiny walk-up with a roommate and cooked most meals at home. I kept helping my siblings when they asked, sometimes even when they didn't. I paid to fix Nathan's laptop when he broke it 2 weeks before starting a new job. I booked Caroline a flight home for Christmas when she realized she couldn't afford it. My parents noticed none of it. Or if they did, they never said anything. In their eyes, I was stable. And stability, in our family, meant you had no right to complain. Then Grandpa got sick. Stage 4 cancer. It moved quickly. Too quickly. I visited as often as I could, sometimes driving 3 hours after work just to sit with him for an hour. He liked to talk about the past, not the glory days, but the hard years. The mistakes. The regrets. He told me once, "You've got the heart of a caretaker. That's good. Just don't let them bleed you dry." I didn't understand what he meant until after he died. The family mourned for a week, then started talking about the estate. Not in hushed tones either. My mother asked if anyone knew where the deed to the lake house was. My father pulled out a folder with a breakdown of the assets he assumed would be split 3 ways. I didn't say anything. Not until the will was read. When the lawyer said my name, there was a pause. A long one. You could feel the air shift in the room. Caroline's mouth opened slightly. Nathan blinked like he hadn't heard right. My parents sat rigid, staring straight ahead. Then came the terms. The entire estate, accounts, property, investments, left in trust to me. To support Jesse in living a life of purpose. No other names. No conditions. It was the first time I'd seen my family truly speechless. Later that night, Dad cornered me in the hallway. "You're not actually keeping all of it, are you?" Caroline was less subtle. Grandpa was confused. He must have thought you'd split it. Even Nathan, who rarely cared about anything, chimed in, "You're not going to be that person, right?" I didn't answer right away. I hadn't made a decision. But something about the way they spoke, as if the money already belonged to them, made me realize the imbalance had become entitlement. I wasn't just the eldest anymore. I was the safety net they assumed would never break. And I was tired. Not of helping, but of how invisible it all had become. 3 weeks later, I made the decision. And the fallout started. The conversation happened on a Sunday afternoon. I remember that detail because my mother always made a point to say Sundays were for family, right before disappearing to show houses or drag Caroline to a charity brunch. That day, I was the one who asked to meet. I chose neutral ground, the back patio at my parents' house. Glass table, stiff cushions, and the faint smell of chlorine from the unused pool. They were all there. Mom, Dad, Caroline, Nathan. No one was eating. No one brought drinks. They all just sat, waiting for me to explain myself. I've made a decision about Grandpa's estate, I said, hands resting on my lap. My mother folded her arms. You mean our estate? I didn't correct her. I just kept going. I'm donating it. Caroline tilted her head like she'd misheard me. Donating what? All of it, I said. The full amount. It's going to an educational nonprofit I've worked with for years. They've just launched a new program for first-gen students in underserved communities. The trust will fund full-ride scholarships, mentorship support, housing stipends. My dad leaned forward slightly. You're not serious. I am, I said. Caroline laughed once, sharp. She glanced at our mother, then back at me, actually insane. Nathan didn't say anything. He was picking at the frayed edge of his jeans, eyes darting between us. I turned to my father. Grandpa left it to me because he believed in what I'm doing. He made it clear. I think he knew this would upset everyone. Mom shook her head. He was old, Jesse. He probably didn't know what he was doing by the end. He did, I said. He met with his lawyer just 2 months before he died. He set up the paperwork himself. But that money was supposed to stay in the family, Dad said. Your grandfather worked his whole life to build that. Right, I said. And now it's going to give other people the chance to do the same. People who've been overlooked. Who never had the advantages we had. Caroline's voice rose. You think you're better than us now? No, I said. I just don't think I owe you anything. That was when it turned. My mother stood up, her face tight. You ungrateful little, after everything we've done for you. What have you done? I asked. You made it clear I was on my own the moment I turned 18. I worked through college, lived paycheck to paycheck, helped both of them. I motioned to Caroline and Nathan whenever they needed anything. I never asked you for help. We raised you, my dad snapped. We taught you discipline, responsibility. You wouldn't be where you are without us. I let the silence settle for a moment. You're right. I wouldn't be. Because I learned early not to count on anyone. Especially not you. Caroline pushed back from her chair, her voice shaking with rage. That money was for us, you fool. Nathan finally looked up. Seriously, Jesse. You don't need all of it. You could have given us something. Even 10%. I don't need it, I said quietly. That's the point. It was never about the money. Well, good for you, Caroline muttered. You get to feel morally superior while the rest of us scramble. I stood up then. I wasn't going to fight. I'd already made my choice. I came to tell you directly because I didn't want it to come through a lawyer. That's all. You're not welcome here anymore, Mom said. I figured. As I walked back through the house, the air was painfully still. Family photos on the wall, Caroline's graduation, Nathan's birthday, one of all of us at the lake house when I was 12. I paused at that one. I remembered that day. Grandpa had taken it. He always stood behind the camera. Never in front. Always watching. No one followed me out. That night, I got a voicemail from my dad. You're going to regret this, he said. You think you're doing something noble, but you're just burning bridges you'll need later. I didn't call back. 3 days later, I got a certified letter. They were contesting the will. They didn't have legal grounds, of course. Grandpa's trust had been airtight. But the message was clear. They weren't just angry. I was now the enemy. What followed was a stretch of silence. No contact. No birthday messages. No passive-aggressive forwarded emails. Nothing. It wasn't until 6 months later that I learned Caroline had left her job. She'd been working for a boutique PR firm that lost its biggest client and downsized. Nathan had bounced between 2 warehouse jobs, then moved back in with my parents. The house, the one with the pool and the stiff patio cushions, went up for sale shortly after. I didn't ask for updates. Mutual friends mentioned things in passing. A cousin texted once, saying, "Don't let the guilt get to you. You did the right thing." But I hadn't said I felt guilty. What I felt was detached. Like I'd stepped out of a play I'd been cast in without auditioning. The nonprofit that received the trust invited me to sit on their advisory board. The fund was already sending its first group of students to college, many of them the first in their families to even consider it. I got to meet them, hear their stories. One of them, a girl from Camden, told me she wanted to be a civil rights attorney. She said, "This scholarship didn't just give me money, it made me feel like someone believed I could do something big." That was the first time I cried about any of it. Not out of grief for my family, but because for the first time, it felt like something I gave actually meant something. Not just a patch. Not just a favor that no one acknowledged. But a real shift. A ripple that might grow into something bigger than I'd ever be. 12 years passed like that. Quietly. I built a life. I built a company. I hired people who believed in the same values. We started small, consulting, educational access, community partnerships. Then we scaled. And eventually, the name became recognizable enough that we needed a larger team. When we posted the job fair announcement online, I didn't think twice. It was just part of our new recruitment strategy. In-person interviews, portfolio reviews, workshops. I showed up early, just to see how things were running. By the end of the day, I sat in on the final round of interviews, just a few candidates left. Mostly routine. Then I saw their names on the schedule. Caroline. Nathan. Their resumes were printed, clipped neatly to the folders in front of me. And when they walked in, they were smiling, polite, professional. Not recognizing me at first. Then they did. Caroline's face drained of color. Nathan's mouth actually dropped open. I didn't flinch. I just looked up from the folder, offered a small, measured nod. "Please," I said, gesturing to the chairs across from me, "have a seat." Neither of them sat. They just stood there, hovering by the door like they were waiting for someone to call cut on a bad scene. Caroline kept glancing at the nameplate on the table, like maybe it was a mistake. Nathan looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. I waited. Not because I wanted to make them squirm, but because I didn't owe them an easier moment. Caroline broke first. She started, then stopped. Her voice had lost that sharp, clipped edge I remembered. Now it just sounded thin. Uncertain. "Yes," I said. "Jesse Craftsman. CEO." Nathan finally lowered himself into the chair, slowly. Caroline followed a second later, still looking like she was trying to figure out if this was a prank. "You're interviewing us?" she asked. I glanced at the folder. That's how final rounds work. There was a silence then, long enough to feel like it belonged in a courtroom. Their resumes were surprisingly neat. Both of them had padded out the last 5 years with vague titles and non-specific roles. Caroline listed a PR consultancy that, from what I could gather, was just her freelancing under a name. Nathan had 4 different jobs since 2020, none longer than a year. One of them was at a startup that had folded. Another at a warehouse he never named. "We had no idea you were involved here," Nathan mumbled. Caroline shot him a look. "We didn't know she owned the company," she said, like that somehow made it better. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to see if they'd get to it on their own. An apology. A question. Anything that acknowledged the weight of what they'd done all those years ago. But they didn't. They just sat there, visibly uncomfortable, trying to figure out how to pitch themselves to the last person they ever expected to need. That was the part one hadn't anticipated, the need. I remembered the way they had looked at me around that patio table. How my mother had said, "Of course you'll split it," as if Grandpa's decision had just been a clerical error waiting to be corrected. As if the estate were communal property and I'd stolen it. No one had asked what the money meant to me, or why he'd chosen me. They didn't consider what I'd given over the years, just what they assumed they were owed. Back then, the assumption was instant. My mom didn't even pause when I told her about the trust. "Well, obviously we'll divide it fairly," she said. Fairly, meaning evenly. As though the years of showing up, paying their bills, fixing their messes, could be split 3 ways now that something tangible had landed in my hands. Nathan had gone quieter at the time, but I still remembered his exact words. "Don't let it get to your head, Jules. It's not like you earned it." I had walked away thinking that was the last word. That our story ended there. But now they were back in front of me. And they needed something again. I glanced down at Caroline's resume. So tell me, I said, keeping my voice even, what brings you to our organization? She hesitated. I've been following your work. The community focus. The education partnerships. It aligns with my values. I looked up. Your values. She flushed. I know how that sounds. But I've done a lot of thinking the past few years. About impact. About rebuilding. Rebuilding. That was new. Caroline had never used words like that when it wasn't for someone else's benefit. I turned to Nathan, who was now staring at a spot on the floor near the table leg. I saw the listing online, he said. Didn't recognize the company at first. But when I read about the mentorship program, it felt like something worth applying to. And what do you think qualifies you? I asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked older. Not just physically. There was something worn down in his posture, like life had been slowly sandpapering away the arrogance he used to carry. I don't know, he admitted. I've messed up a lot. But I've worked. And I'm trying to do better. For a second, I thought about all the years I spent covering for both of them. The transfers from my checking account. The unpaid loans. The time I stayed on the phone with Caroline for 3 hours after her third layoff while she complained that the world was unfair, never once asking if I had the bandwidth to handle her crisis. And then there was Nathan, who had treated me like a walking ATM but never remembered my birthday. Who showed up to Grandpa's funeral in a wrinkled shirt and left before the reception because he had plans. That day on the patio, when I told them about the donation, Caroline had screamed. Not argued. Screamed. She called me selfish. Accused me of doing it for attention. Said I was jealous of her life. And when I said nothing, just stood there, she yelled, "You're ruining everything." My dad didn't defend me. My mother didn't step in. Nathan didn't say a word. I left with my dignity and nothing else. Now they sat in front of me, needing a job. Needing something from me again. But this time, they didn't have leverage. They couldn't guilt me. They couldn't shame me. They couldn't threaten to cut me off, because they already had. I appreciate your interest, I said carefully. And I recognize that people grow. But you should know we take culture seriously here. Mutual respect. Accountability. Ownership of past behavior. Nathan nodded. Caroline blinked quickly, like she might cry but wouldn't dare. This isn't a decision I'll make alone, I added. We have a hiring committee. I'm just one voice. I understand, Caroline said. Her voice was almost a whisper. Thank you for the opportunity, Nathan added. They stood. This time slowly. Neither of them tried to hug me. Or reach out. Or say anything personal. Just a quiet nod. And then they left the room. I sat there for a long time afterward. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. Just still. That was the real shift. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I didn't need them to apologize or grovel or even understand. Because the story I'd told myself, that I'd one day win them over by becoming someone undeniable, was over. I already had. They just didn't realize it until it was too late. The press release went out on a Wednesday. Simple headline. No photo. Just a 2-paragraph announcement from the nonprofit, a new endowment, the Harold Craftsman Fund for Community Health, had been established, seeded by a donation of nearly $900,000. The fund would support mobile clinics, mental health outreach, and preventative care programs in low-income areas across the state. They asked if I wanted a quote. I gave them one. He wanted it to mean something. That was it. No fanfare. No long speech. Just the truth. By Friday, my mother had called 6 times. I didn't answer. I knew what the voicemails would say even before I played them. The first one was almost calm. Jesse, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand. The second came later that night. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but you've embarrassed this family. The third, mid-morning, shorter. Your grandfather didn't raise you to do this. The rest blurred together. Variations of the same theme: outrage, guilt, blame. No curiosity. No attempt to understand. And then came the text from Caroline. You think this makes you noble? It makes you pathetic. I didn't respond. The board meeting was the next day. The nonprofit's leadership asked me to attend in person. They wanted to acknowledge the gift, but also discuss how best to honor Grandpa's legacy in the programming. They'd already started sketching out ideas, wellness workshops, mobile van routes, even an annual community fellowship in his name. At the end of the meeting, one of the board members, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a calm voice, pulled me aside. "Your grandfather was a principal, wasn't he?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She smiled. "I had him in middle school. He caught me skipping lunch to avoid a group of girls who used to tease me. Took me into his office, gave me half a sandwich, and said, 'You can't outgrow your shadow if you never stand in the sun.'" I never forgot that. I hadn't heard that story before, but it sounded exactly like him. That night, I sat in my apartment and stared at my phone. The missed calls. The angry texts. I scrolled all the way back to the first voicemail from Dad after the will reading. "You're going to regret this." They always said that, anytime I did something they didn't like. Took a job that didn't pay enough. Declined to come home for Caroline's birthday. Said no to helping Nathan move after his 4th eviction. You'll regret it. But regret didn't feel like the right word anymore. Not after seeing the nonprofit's plan. Not after hearing stories from people whose lives Grandpa had touched, quietly and without expectation. Regret implies you'd go back and choose differently. I wouldn't. That week, I formally cut all contact. I emailed the family lawyer. Informed him that any further communication about the estate should go through legal channels. I blocked their numbers. I deleted their messages. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friends, until a month had passed. And then one morning, while I was making coffee, my mother showed up at my office. She didn't have an appointment. She walked straight past reception and into the hallway, her heels echoing louder than necessary. My assistant knocked on my door, wide-eyed. "There's a woman out here who says she's your mother." I stood slowly. Let her in. She looked older than I remembered. Not physically, she still had the same tailored coat, the same carefully highlighted hair, but something around her eyes had changed. Something brittle. "You're really going to pretend we don't exist now," she said as soon as the door closed. "I'm not pretending," I said. "I'm accepting." She narrowed her eyes. "You think this makes you better than us?" "No," I said. "It makes me done." She sat down, uninvited, and crossed her legs. "You humiliated us. Donating that money in public, do you know how many people have called us? Your aunt, your father's partners, it wasn't about you." "Of course it was about us," she snapped. "Everything you do is about pushing back." I didn't answer. "You've always had a chip on your shoulder, Jessie. Ever since you were a teenager. Always so dramatic about being the oldest. The responsible one. Like we forced you into that role." I looked at her. Really looked. She believed it. She truly believed they hadn't made me into the version of myself that had no room to need anything. The one who fixed things, paid bills, absorbed tension so the rest of them could fall apart without consequence. "I'm not here to argue," she said, softer now. "I'm here because your sister is hurt. Your brother too." "They're hurt," I repeated. "Because I gave something away that was never theirs." Her voice dropped. "You think we're never going to forgive you?" I leaned forward. "I think you still don't understand what you did." There was a long pause. She looked away. "You didn't just ignore Grandpa's choice. You dismissed why he made it. He saw something in me. Something you never did. You didn't question why. You just assumed he was wrong. That I didn't deserve it." She opened her mouth, then closed it. I stood. "You're not here for me. You're here because you're uncomfortable. Because the story you've been telling about who we are doesn't hold up anymore." She stood too. "We thought you were better than this." I walked to the door. "I am." As she left, she turned once more. "He would have wanted us to stay a family." I didn't reply, because I knew what Grandpa would have said. He'd have said, "Staying isn't the same as belonging." The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail from Nathan. "You're going to let money break us," he said. "You're going to punish us forever?" No. I just wasn't going to subsidize their version of family anymore. I listened once, then deleted it. A week later, our first community health van went out. We hosted a launch event in the city plaza. Local press showed up. So did a few state representatives. Someone asked me why I chose to honor my grandfather this way. I said, because he always believed what you build should outlast you. Afterward, a young nurse approached me. She'd applied for one of the new mobile roles. She said, "Your grandfather helped my dad finish high school. Said he had too much potential to get kicked out. My dad still talks about it. Said he was the first adult who saw him." It was the fourth story like that I'd heard in 2 days. Each one added weight to the choice I'd made. And not once did I feel like I'd lost anything. Because when someone only loves the parts of you that serve them, letting go isn't losing. It's recovering. After my mother stormed out of my office, there was quiet. Not the kind that signals resolution, but the kind that hangs like unfinished business. Still, I didn't reach out. I didn't follow up. I let it sit. Because for once, I wasn't going to clean up the mess. Within weeks, the fallout started showing. It came gradually, never dramatic. No massive public scenes. Just signs that the structure they'd built, the one where I was the buffer between their decisions and their consequences, was starting to crack. Caroline lost a client. Then 2 more. The little consultancy she'd propped up with borrowed templates and borrowed money started to unravel. The logo was still up online, but the site stopped updating. Her social media presence, once carefully curated to show the life of a self-styled creative director, began to go quiet. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she'd moved in with our parents. Again. Nathan was already back there. He'd burned through another job, another lease, and this time there were no savings to float him. No emergency transfer from me. No sister bailing him out with a few $100s and a gentle reminder to budget better next time. Mom had been forced to cut back on work. Her real estate numbers had dipped, and even the holiday open house she'd hosted for 20 years didn't happen that year. Dad's business, once stable, was struggling. I don't know the details. I didn't ask. But I noticed the country club membership was gone. And the house? It went up for sale in the spring. No one called to tell me. I found out when someone forwarded me the listing, not knowing who owned it. For bedrooms. Well-maintained with mature landscaping. The photos were careful not to show the fading paint or the dented garage door Nathan backed into years ago and never fixed. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't want to see them fail. But I also didn't step in. That was the change. Not what happened to them, but what didn't happen for me. Because the old version of me would have made a quiet call. Would have offered to float a few months of their mortgage just until things stabilize. Would have sent job leads to Caroline. Would have called Nathan late at night, talking him through his self-doubt again. Instead, I let silence do what it needed to do. And in that silence, something new started to grow. Not from them, from me. The community health program took off faster than any of us predicted. The mobile units were serving 3 neighborhoods within the first quarter. By summer, we'd expanded to 7. We were getting emails from city councils, from school districts, from rural clinics asking if we'd consider expanding to their counties. People wanted in, not because of my name or my grandfather's legacy, but because the model was working. We were reaching people no one else had. One morning, I walked into a team meeting and found 2 of our new hires setting up folding chairs for an outreach event. One of them, a nurse practitioner in her late 20s, looked up and said, "I don't know if anyone's told you this, but my little brother got his first physical in 5 years because of our clinic." You should have seen the look on his face. He thought we were going to make him do a fitness test. I laughed. And then I cried. Quietly. In the bathroom, later. Not because it was sad, but because I couldn't remember the last time I had felt proud of something without immediately wondering how it would land with my family. That summer, I turned 39. I didn't throw a party. I didn't post anything about it. But 2 days later, I got a package at the office. No name. Just a plain box with no return address. Inside was a framed photograph of Grandpa standing in front of his old school. The image was yellowed with age, clearly taken by someone with an unsteady hand. But he was smiling. A real, unposed smile. There was a note inside. "You made something real." He'd be proud. No signature. I didn't tell anyone about it. I kept it on a shelf in my office, just high enough that I had to stand to really see it. By fall, the company I had started, almost by accident, had grown to nearly 50 employees. We offered benefits. PTO. A retirement plan. It was everything I'd once dreamed about when I was eating instant noodles in grad school, trying to stretch my paychecks across too many days. And then one day, we opened a new position. Community Outreach Director. I wasn't thinking about them when we posted the listing. We needed the role filled. Someone organized, empathetic, good with logistics and people. Someone who understood how to hold a mission and still hit deadlines. But the application came in 2 weeks later. Caroline. She used a different last name. Professionally, she still went by the one she'd picked up during a short-lived marriage years ago. But the resume was hers. And this time, it wasn't inflated. No buzzwords. No bravado. Just 3 pages of recent work, contract roles, event planning, social campaign metrics. A decent cover letter. And a note at the bottom. If this makes it to you, I just want you to know I've changed. Or at least I'm trying to. I sat with it for a long time. Didn't call. Didn't write back. I sent the application to our hiring lead, just like I did with every other internal referral. I didn't tell them anything. No context. No story. Just the name. And a question, would you interview her? 2 weeks later, they did. She didn't make it past the second round. Not because of her name. Not because of me. But because another candidate was better. More qualified. More prepared. And that was that. No hard feelings. No second chances arranged behind the scenes. The world didn't owe her the position. And I didn't either. What I owed, to her, to myself, was fairness. And that's what she got. Months passed. The holidays came and went. I spent Thanksgiving with friends in Vermont, huddled around a wood stove and eating too much pie. Christmas, I volunteered with a team that assembled care packages for shelter residents. On New Year's Eve, I made one resolution: stay consistent. No grand reinventions. No declarations. Just keep doing the work. Keep living the choice. And in the quiet that followed, something unexpected happened. Nathan sent a letter. Handwritten. 2 pages. It didn't ask for anything. It just said, I didn't understand before. What it cost you to keep showing up for us. And what it meant when you stopped. You were right to walk away. I wasn't ready to see it then. I think I'm starting to now. He included a photo of him with a kid I didn't recognize. His son. Apparently born last year. The caption on the back said, trying to be better. For him and maybe for you too. I didn't know what to do with that letter. I didn't reply right away. But I kept it. Because even if it didn't mean everything, it meant something. And sometimes, that's enough. The letter sat unopened on my kitchen counter for a full week. I knew it was from my mother the moment I saw the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable, tight cursive in blue ink, underlined name on the front like a formal invitation. She always underlined names. It used to make our Christmas cards look like announcements. It had been 2 years since I last saw her. 2.5 since she walked into my office and said I had embarrassed the family. Since then, there had been silence. No calls. No texts. No birthdays or holidays. Even Nathan's letter, quiet, vulnerable, and unexpected, hadn't come with any follow-up from her. Until now. I finally opened it on a Sunday evening. Quiet apartment. A cup of tea growing cold beside me. I had the envelope in one hand and the paper in the other before I realized I was holding my breath. The note was short. Jesse, I heard about the new clinic. Someone sent me the article. I wanted to say congratulations. I've been thinking about things. If there's ever a chance to talk, I'd like that. Mom, there was no apology. No explanation. No mention of the trust, the fallout, the years of silence. Just a tentative gesture that felt more like a tap on the door than an opening. I didn't know what to do with it. I left it on the table and went about the rest of my night, but it hovered. The idea of a conversation. The memory of all the ones we never had. Of the way she'd once told a neighbor, Jessie doesn't need help. She's always been self-motivated, like it was a compliment and not a dismissal. For years, I'd tried to earn her respect by shrinking myself. By playing the role she was most comfortable with, the daughter who handled everything. The one who never asked for more. When I was 13 and came home from school crying because a teacher made a snide comment about my clothes, hand-me-downs from a cousin, she hadn't comforted me. She just said, "You'll learn not to take things personally." When I aced my SATs, her first response was, "Good. Now make sure you don't get overconfident." The praise always had a leash attached. Just enough to keep me useful, never enough to make me feel seen. Still, I thought about her letter every day for the next 2 weeks. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready. But I also didn't throw it out. Instead, I reached out to Nathan. He'd sent 2 more letters since the first. No pressure. No demands. Just updates. Photos of his son. A story about teaching him how to skip rocks. A small note about starting therapy. We agreed to meet for lunch at a quiet diner halfway between our cities. Nothing dramatic. No big reunion. Just sandwiches and shared air. He looked different. Older, yes, but steadier. Like whatever had been rattling around inside him had settled enough to stop making noise. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, unwrapping his straw. "I wasn't sure I would either," I said. He nodded. "You're not wrong to be cautious." There was no script. No prepared apology. Just a conversation. He talked about fatherhood, how it was humbling. How it forced you to confront the ways you were raised. He told me he caught himself once, about to tell his son to stop crying like a girl, and stopped. Thought of how many times he'd been told to man up. Thought of how many times I'd been told to be quiet. "I don't want him to carry it forward," he said. "I hope he doesn't," I said. We didn't talk about the inheritance. Not directly. But we didn't need to. It was everywhere, woven through every shift in tone and every hesitation between topics. He didn't try to justify what happened. He didn't explain it away. He just let the silence sit where it needed to. At the end of the meal, he asked if we could do it again. "No pressure," he said. "Just, if you feel like it." I said yes. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning I could live with. After that lunch, I started thinking about Caroline. We hadn't spoken since the interview. She hadn't reached out, and neither had I. But I'd heard, through back channels, through coworkers and old contacts, that she'd taken a job at a nonprofit out of state. Administrative role. Lower profile. Nothing flashy. Apparently, she was good at it. Quietly efficient. I kept thinking about her resume. About the way she'd sat across from me, not asking for anything, just trying to be taken seriously. It wasn't redemption. But it wasn't manipulation either. For once, it wasn't about the performance. A few weeks later, I sent her an email. "I heard you're doing good work. That matters." Jessie, no response came. Not right away. But I hadn't sent it for a response. I sent it because she needed to hear it. And I needed to know I could say it without reopening the door. Some relationships aren't meant to be what they were. They just need a more honest shape. By summer, the nonprofit had expanded into 2 more counties. Our latest program, a community wellness center in a food desert, launched in partnership with a group of high school volunteers. At the ribbon cutting, one of the students gave a speech about access and agency. She said, "Sometimes, the people who see you the least prepare you the most." I wasn't sure if she meant it the way I heard it. But I stood in the back and nodded. Later that month, I mailed my mother a postcard. Just a photo of the clinic. A caption underneath. "It's working. No return address." Just enough. Because this part of the story wasn't about rebuilding what we had. It was about learning to live with the parts we lost, and the ones we never really had in the first place. I think it surprised everyone that I didn't gloat. They expected something, I'm sure. Some grand finale. Some "I told you so" wrapped in good press and perfect optics. But that was never the point. By the time the last clinic opened, our 10th location, a converted library on the edge of a low-income neighborhood that hadn't had reliable medical access in over a decade, I didn't feel victorious. I felt relieved. Not because it proved anything to my family, but because it finally stopped needing to. 12 years earlier, when I first told them about the donation, Caroline rolled her eyes and called it a vanity project. She said I was bored. Said the nonprofit world was just a place for people who can't hack it in real business. She used to say that a lot about artists, social workers, teachers. People who didn't chase money the way she did. I remember once, back when I was still working late nights writing grant proposals, she called while out drinking with friends and put me on speakerphone. "Tell them what you do," she laughed. like for actual work. I brushed it off. I always did. But I never forgot it. And Nathan? He didn't laugh. He just stared at me across the dinner table and said, "You could have doubled that money in 5 years if you'd put it in the market." Hell, even a mutual fund. When I told him that wasn't the point, he shook his head like I was a child. You don't walk away from money like that unless you're trying to prove something. Maybe I was, but not to them. I was trying to prove, to myself, that legacy could mean more than accumulated wealth and family photos taken once a year out of obligation. That it could mean building something quietly. Something that lasted. By the time the final clinic launched, we'd served over 60,000 patients. Housed 4 mental health counselors full-time. Sponsored 2 community fellows through medical school. We had alumni. Volunteers who had become staff. Teenagers who'd grown into organizers. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't glossy. But it was working. I hadn't heard from Caroline in nearly a year when a letter arrived. This time, it wasn't asking for anything. It was short. Typed. No salutation. I saw the article about the 10th site. I was wrong. You turned it into something real. See, no apology. But I didn't expect one. The closest she ever came to that, growing up, was leaving something on your bed after a fight. A borrowed sweater, a note folded like origami, a slice of pie she knew you liked. She always moved sideways through remorse. She didn't know how to walk straight into it. I kept the letter. Not because I needed proof, but because it marked something. A shift. A quiet step in a different direction. Nathan and I spoke occasionally. We weren't close, not in the way people imagine when they think about reconciliation. But we could talk. He sent photos of his son. Asked me once if I'd come visit. I said maybe. And I meant it. I never heard from my mother again. She didn't respond to the postcard. Didn't call. I imagine she still tells people we're not close, a phrase she used often, like emotional estrangement was just a scheduling conflict. That's fine. Some relationships stay stuck. Others grow at a distance. Ours just dissolved. I stopped wishing for anything else. Because what came next wasn't about repair, it was about reality. In the years that followed, I continued the work. Trained new leaders. Transitioned from day-to-day operations to mentorship and strategy. Eventually, I stepped away from the CEO role. Not because I was tired, but because I had built something strong enough to outlive me. The new director is a former recipient of our first scholarship program. Her name's Tasha. First-gen, public school grad, raised by a single mom. Sharp. Focused. Kind without being soft. The kind of leader who walks into a room and doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Watching her take over wasn't sad. It was the most peaceful moment of my professional life. And outside of work, my circle stayed small. Chosen. A few friends who knew the whole story and didn't need me to be any version of myself, but the one who showed up. A partner who didn't flinch when I said I didn't do holidays with my family. Who once said, "You don't owe anyone access to you just because they share your last name." I wrote that down. Kept it on a slip of paper in my wallet. Sometimes I'd meet people who knew nothing about the past. Who only knew the name on the buildings. The clinics. The articles. They'd ask me why I did it. I used to try to explain. Now I just say, it was the right thing. And that's enough. Last month, we held a reunion event for the original staff and scholarship recipients. I stood in the back, as usual. Tasha gave a speech. So did one of the early mentors. Near the end, a young man stood up, tall, confident, early 30s. He introduced himself. Said he'd been part of the second cohort. That the program had paid for his housing, helped him get therapy, and connected him to a mentor who still checked in once a month. He paused. Then he looked at me. I never met the person who started it. But I hope she knows it worked. Not just the clinics. The belief. That's what changed things. People clapped. I didn't. I just nodded once, quietly. Then stepped outside for air. There, under the soft glow of a streetlight, I pulled out my phone and scrolled. I still had Caroline's email. Nathan's photos. Even the last letter from my mother. And every so often, I'd reread them. Not to reopen anything, but to remember. To remember what I came from. what I chose, and what I refused to keep carrying. Because in the end, it wasn't about the inheritance. It was about who they expected me to be when they thought I'd stay quiet, and who I became when I didn't. Have you ever been called selfish for finally putting yourself first? Or lost people the moment you stopped making yourself small? Let me know in the comments, what would you have done in my place? If this hit home, share it with someone who needs the reminder, and make sure to like and subscribe for more true stories about standing your ground and rewriting the narrative.